If you ever say to a woman that what you really want is a strong man to just take charge in a relationship, you want to be the submissive one and you want him to be dominant and masculine and take on the leadership role, he's going to be making most of the decisions and you're going to be supporting him. If you say that to a woman, very few are going to agree with you outright. It's just not going to happen because on the surface it sounds kind of sexist. It sounds patriarchal. If you put that statement to her, then the cultural programming of feminism starts to kick in and she thinks, no, I can't say that that's what I want. I can't admit to that. I want to be a strong, independent woman. I want to be equals in my relationship. I don't want a man to be in charge. Whenever I hear a woman say that she's not attracted to dominant masculine men, that she's not looking for a man to be a leader in her relationship, I write it off as cognitive dissonance. I just think that they're either not being honest with themselves or they lack self-awareness about what they truly desire. And I'm not somebody who believes that there is no value in speaking to women and asking what they want. The stuff that I talk about on this channel, I speak to women in my personal life about this stuff all the time. Listening to their thoughts, listening to their opinions, I find extremely enlightening. And I think there's tremendous value in hearing females' perspective on this stuff. But just because a woman says something, she says that she desires a specific type of man, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. You need to take into account the context, specifically the Western cultural context with feminism with which she's grown up. This generation has been subject to some intense propaganda and cultural conditioning, telling her to reject the idea of masculinity in men, telling her to reject her own biology, her own femininity, and live up to this feminist ideal of being strong, masculine, and an independent woman. But when women are saying one thing with their words and yet are consistently doing something completely different with their actions and their behavior, at a certain point, it would be foolish to continue to believe the words that they're speaking. You have to pay attention to their actions. The truth of it is this, that despite whatever women say, they don't want to be in charge in a relationship. They don't want to be a leader. They want the man to take on that role. 99% of relationships where the woman is in charge and the man's just the submissive yes person, yes dear, whatever you want dear, I'm happy to do whatever you'd like dear. In those relationships, both people are miserable because that dynamic is fundamentally against what their biology dictates. Whereas if you look at healthy, functional relationships, they all share a common theme. In all of those relationships, the man is in charge. He takes on that leadership role. He adopts that responsibility. He isn't a dictator. He's not ruling over her in some horrible abusive dynamic. He's just confident. He's masculine. And by virtue of his own competence, he is well qualified to take on that leadership role. And she just naturally slots in a supportive, feminine role. What I found interesting in my interviews videos is that when you first ask a woman a question, often you'll encounter this cultural programming and the woman will give the answer that is expected of her. That's just the propaganda being regurgitated, speaking the way that she thinks that she should be speaking. But if you give women enough time, or maybe you ask the question in a different way, you can often get to the truth. I want you to check out this footage. This girl was really sweet, really friendly, but I think that this interview gives a really good example of what I'm talking about.
Are you attracted to confident, independent men who have a strong sense of purpose in their life?
Well, I would say that not really, just because I'm more like a family person and I'm very confident in myself, so I think two of us, I would be proud.
So her initial answer is no, she's not interested in that confident, independent man. But when we phrase the question a little bit differently, it actually causes her to reflect.
Would you rather your boyfriend pursue his own goals as his number one priority, or spend the majority of his time trying to make you happy?
Well, if I have to choose between two, I would rather let him chase his goals, that he could be fulfilled and successful, and I would be more like a supporting person and in the part of his success.
You see, that's quite different. When we rephrased it and put it to her as a this or that question, she said that she'd be interested in a man who chases his own goals so that she can play that supportive role and just be a part of his success. When we interview women, we see this phenomena play out all of the time. It happened again later on in the interview. Check it out.
If a man wanted you to be the dominant one in a relationship and make most of the decisions, would that be attractive, would you say?
Well, I actually wouldn't mind, because maybe if my personality is like more active and I know what I'm doing and he's happy with that and he's more like flexible and he doesn't mind, he's like really chilled person, I think that's okay. It all depends really like what I think in the end of the day it's really important that you know what is important for you, what's right for you, and you find the right person that complements you, I would say.
Okay, but in your case, if you were the more dominant one, would that still be attractive? Would you lose attractiveness, or would you still be attracted, or would you prefer it that way? Or
well, I would say that there are some aspects in life or in the relationship when I'm the dominant one, and my husband at the moment, like he's fine with that. But at the same time, I really like when he takes that leadership, and then I just shut down my mouth. I'm like, oh, he knows what he is doing at this point.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Watching an opinion change before your eyes. And I think that we got to the truth by the end there, because in her own words, she said, I really like it when he takes on that leadership position, and I just shut down my own mouth because he knows what he's doing. Now, please don't think that I'm having a go at this girl. Not at all. She was really sweet, really friendly. And I think that it's important to always remember that we put these girls in a pretty strange position. You know, a stranger just comes up to them, you know, has a camera, says, hey, can I interview you? And then asks these really specific questions. I'm sure that it's difficult to just formulate intelligent, coherent answers right there on the spot. And I am really grateful to all of the women that I feature on this channel for agreeing to let us interview you. I love the interviews. I think that they can be really informative and really entertaining. And I think that this interview really demonstrated well how difficult it can be initially to sometimes get to the truth. But if you're patient and just sort of rephrase the question, often you can actually get to a more honest answer. Now, the reason that I'm talking about this is I want to explore why it is not sexist for men to be leaders in a relationship. But first, I want to tell you about my content that is adults only, 18 plus. What to do if you grow up in a household with a lot of sexual shame. I talk about what to do if you grow up with parents who are not sex positive and you feel like you have to repress what's natural to you in order to function in your household. I talk about my personal beliefs about promiscuity. I talk about when sexual encounters are appropriate, and I talk about why I love the sex positive community. I go into detail about how parents unwittingly create sexual shame and the appropriate way to raise children in a sex-positive environment so they grow up with a healthy attitude towards sex and towards their own sexuality. I finish with specific steps and advice that parents can take to help their children. I love talking about sex, but this is the kind of stuff that I can't talk about on YouTube because certain topics, certain words are just guaranteed to get me demonetized. So I put all of my more explicit content on Patreon. It's just $5 a month. If you want to check that out, go ahead and sign up. Okay, back to why men need to be leaders in a relationship. And the first thing that we need to do is properly define what a leader actually is, because it means different things to different people. For some, when they hear the word leader, they think privilege. For other people, when they hear leadership, they think burden. From a certain perspective, you could paint a leader as a power-hungry dictator, somebody who rules with an iron fist and oppresses all of the people beneath them. They allow no dissent, no opposition. It's all about exploiting those more vulnerable for their own selfish gain. So if that's your perspective and you hear me say that men should be the leaders in a relationship, you think, my God, this is so sexist. This is the patriarchy. Women are forced to be slaves to men. They are oppressed. Men are just exploiting women for their own selfish gain. This is horrible. But for other people, when they hear the term leader, they think of somebody who self-sacrifices, somebody who voluntarily takes on the burden of others. They adopt that responsibility for the sake of other people. When they hear that men need to be leaders in relationships, they imagine him working long hours, carrying all of the financial burden, having to take on all the responsibility, having to make all of the decisions. Basically, his is the strength that gets the relationship through, while she's free to go to yoga and sip on cocktails and just be carried along by him. Both of these are extremes, and the reality is that leadership contains elements of both. Being a leader is both a privilege and a burden, and women shouldn't resent the privileges that come from male leadership because that's what balances it out. That's the reward. That's how they are compensated for all of the burdens that they adopt. The grass is always greener on the other side, and lots of women look at men in leadership positions and they can only see the benefits. They can only see the privileges. But being a leader is also a burden. And so when a man takes on that leadership role in a relationship, he takes responsibility on for both of them. It's his responsibility to make the tough financial decisions. It's his responsibility to make the tough choices when things aren't going well. He has to balance the interests of everybody and learn to prioritize what's important. He doesn't have the luxury of thinking just about himself. He has to think about what's right for her, what's right for any children that they have, and how to balance all of these interests. That is not easy. Having that responsibility, that is stressful. And don't you think that some guys just dream of a day where they can leave all that behind and they can just relax and surrender and let somebody else be in charge for once? Just trust that someone else has got all that handled and that they can relax. But men don't have the luxury of reneging on their own responsibilities. There are people that they are responsible for, and leadership means you don't really get to take a holiday. But at the same time, let's not pretend like leadership isn't without its perks. Sure, you might not get romantically surprised by your partner who takes you out to dinner and pays for the entire meal. As a man, that's your job. That's what you do. But you get to choose the restaurant. You get to pick a place that you like, that has food that you enjoy. You get to pick the time and the place that you get to surprise her. There's a lot that's within your control, and that is good. That's a privilege. Sure, it's a stressful burden having to make all of the money so that you can buy a house, so that you can buy a car. But at least you get to buy the house and car that you want. That's your reward. That's your compensation for all of the work that you did. I don't know how well I'm explaining myself, but what I'm trying to say is that the privileges that men enjoy by being the leaders in a relationship is not some unearned privilege that's just gifted to them. No, it is hard work. It is their earned reward. That is their natural compensation for all of the effort that they put in. You need that reward in order for it to balance out. Both men and women have their natural roles as dictated by our biology, and there are good parts and bad parts to both. But largely they balance themselves out and they naturally fall in line with our preferences. If you have a relationship that goes against biology, where there is no balance, it's going to be a complete and utter disaster. If you have a relationship where a man has all of the responsibility of making the money, he has all of that financial burden, but there's no reward for him, like his wife controls all of the finances and she decides how to spend all of the money, then where is his incentive? It doesn't exist, and he's very quickly going to burn out. Pretty soon he's just going to become a hollow shell of a man who just does whatever his wife tells him to do, and he has no independent thoughts of his own. And guess what? Women hate those kinds of men. If you haven't seen my video, Domesticated, the lowest a man can sink, definitely check that out because I go into a lot of detail about it. I'll put a link down below. But it is so common for women to resent men who abdicate their leadership responsibilities, who don't want to take on that mantle of responsibility. They hate men who lack the courage to claim the reward that they deserve. We're going to watch one more piece of footage from that same interview.
Do women ever get secretly angry that a man stops pursuing his independent dreams and devotes himself instead to the relationship?
Well, that's a very good question. It's very important to communicate in the relationship and to actually find out why she lost that respect. Was it because she had a different expectation, or he clearly failed and he didn't kind of apologize or repair his mistakes?
She lost respect because he didn't claim her respect as his natural reward, something that he deserves, something that he is entitled to. And women will take their cues from men. So if you act as though you don't deserve any respect, she won't give you any. Just to remind you one more time, I'm not talking about some patriarchal, dominant dictator who just demands an unearned respect. I'm talking about the respect naturally given to a man who's a good partner, a good provider, a good father and husband. Of course you respect him because he's a strong, capable, masculine man. Yes, her respect is a privilege that he enjoys, but it is a privilege that he has thoroughly earned. So don't resent him for having that. Remember, if you want to hear more from me, including my bonus content on what to do if you grow up in a household with lots of sexual shame, check out my Patreon.